15 minutes or so, the state capture inquiry will resume this morning following a short recess. Today, the Commission will hear the testimony of former Chief Director in the Office of the Minister of the Presidency, Brent Adrian Simons. For more on today's proceedings, we're joined by our reporter, Manqoba Mchunu. A very good morning to you. Last week, the Commission was marking a year since its existence. What were the conversations around this?
Well, of course, you'll recall that the SABC also spoke to the Deputy Chief Justice, who is the chair of this commission, of course, saying that he himself has been shocked by some of the evidence that he's heard from this commission. Of course, you can recall many of the testimonies that we've heard from the likes of former cabinet ministers, as well as, some of the financial, the CEOs or the COO of BOSASA, Angelo Agrizi, who came to testify, making shocking revelations about several cabinet ministers having benefited, having received bribes from BOSASA and so forth. We've also heard of how allegedly the former president had been involved in as far as, certain favors to the Gupta family. We heard from previous ministers testifying how, for example, they were offered jobs by the Gupta brothers. So those are some of the revelations that have come out of this process. But of course, the judge saying that, there's still a long way to go. In fact, they've requested a further 6 months, addition to the time that they have. And he's saying that he hopes that by mid-2020, they will conclude. But, it's still a long way. It's still too early to tell whether that will happen, because already he says over 700 of those implicated notices to people that have been implicated have been issued. But funny enough, he says most of those implicated people do not want to cross-examine any of the witnesses. So still a long way to go. And of course, we know that the BOSASA issue is now also one of the issues that has been looked into, with the DCJ writing a letter to some cabinet ministers, as well as the president, President Cyril Ramaphosa, to say that they must actually give an affidavit, a sworn statement, to say whether they have had interacted with any of the Gupta brothers, whether they had any business dealings with the Gupta brothers, as well as BOSASA officials. So we're still going to look at that leg of the testimony.
As a journalist who's been covering the process, do you have a sense that we're anywhere near uncovering all of the things that happened that led to the State Capture Commission being instituted?
Well, Desiree, I can certainly tell you that the evidence that we've heard is some of it is very shocking. When you think of the Estina Dairy Farm project and how promises were made and by who, of course, you get
money was actually allocated but didn't get to the right destination.
You get a sense of really what went on. And I think slowly but surely some of the truth is slowly unraveling. We know there have been reports in certain issues, including the Estina matter, by the public protector, of course, of maladministration, financial misconduct that happened there. So we are starting to see and unearth some of the things that really went on. Before this, we had, some sort of ideas to what happened, but as to the extent of the corruption, the maladministration, all of that we're starting to hear as these witnesses take the stand. And of course, one of the most implicated persons in this particular commission thus far has been the former president, President Jacob Zuma, who's been implicated by most of the witnesses who've come there. And of course, we're still going to hear from him. We hear that he might be coming back this year, before the end of the year. So still a long way to go. But I can certainly say that, from some of the testimonies that we've listened to, obviously we've seen some action with regard to some issues. This Frida Dairy Farm issue as well, the public protector now saying that she's also going to expand and look as to whether some of those officials that looking at the Premier and the MEC were actually implicated in this process. So there certainly has been a movement with regards to some of the evidence we're hearing, and of course, and I think it's starting slowly, the picture starting to form in the minds of many South Africans as to what really could have happened.
More evidence coming up this morning, especially with Brent Adrian Simons, who's supposed to start testimony this morning, who is a former official in the Office of the Minister in the Presidency. Which minister in the Presidency was he an official for? That's
the late Minister Collins Chabane. And of course, there are a lot of allegations that are surrounding this issue, because 2 years ago, you recall that Brent Simons had penned a letter to the then National Speaker of Parliament, Baleka Mbete, really complaining about or making allegations that the former president had, sort of been asking cabinet ministers to help his relatives secure government contracts. And of course, he says that, at the time that was done through also the minister in the presidency, Collins Chabane. And of course, he says, you recall that the former president denied this in parliament, but he says that, he will testify to the effect as to how the former president gave those instructions.
So he'll give detail.
He'll give details of what really transpired in that regard. But of course, not only that issue, Desri, he'll also speak on the firing of Themba Maseko, who was the former GCIS head. Of course, you recall there was some controversy around the firing of Maseko, with the president denying that he fired Maseko.
As to where the order came from.
Where the order came from. And of course, you recall that this was in relation to him having been given an instruction to help the Guptas. And he says, he refused to do that. And of course, the allegation here is that, Brent Simons says that an order came from the president to Minister Collins Chabane not to renew Masego's contract. So those are some of the details that we expect to hear from him.
He's not the only one testifying.
He's not the only one testifying. Of course, we're also expecting the chief of staff, the former chief of staff in the Minister of the Presidency's office, who is Abednego Hlungwane, to also take the stand today.
Thank you so much for that update, Manqoba Mchunu. And of course, we will go there live as soon as proceedings begin.